Welcome back to the Other Side Lifestyle Podcast with Jim and Aram. Today we got a real piece of shit. This guy attacks people online. He trolls people. He gets trolled. He might be a troll, like in actual real life. He doesn't look like it. He's fantastic looking. Aram normally isn't jealous of the two other people on the screen, but today he is. I'm one of the two.
I've also seen him shirtless countless times, and at this point, I'm never stepping into a gym again.
That's understandable. I probably wouldn't leave your house. I mean, it looks like you don't with that skin tone living in Southern California. That's every few episodes we got to reference his skin tone. He's working hard with his clients. All right, today we got Dr. Joey Munoz. Am I saying it the way that you pronounce it?
Yes.
How do a lot of people say it?
I'm considering signing up for this. I'm reconsidering signing up and agreeing to be on this podcast, man.
You should. This is
trolls.
This is how we do it. We don't know them, but we act like we do. You know. Yeah. Aram was about to just get right into something. He's like, dude, fucking hit record. So we did the intro, and we want to go at. We set up Joey thinking this was gonna be friendly. We're gonna attack.
We're just going to attack. So, Joe, if anybody's been living under a rock, Joey Munoz has been putting out some of the best content on the interweb.
I knew you were going to say interwebs.
World, whatever it's called. You're a PhD in nutrition?
Yes, correct.
First of all, explain to our audience what the fuck that actually means and what that qualifies you to do.
Oh, man. Well, by definition, it means I went to school for a very long time.
Okay.
So, apparently he struggles in school if it took that long. Apparently.
I didn't know what a PhD was before I even started, actually.
Jesus.
And I think most people don't even know what a PhD really is.
Philosophy?
So PhD
Jermaine Dupri said player hating degree.
Player hating degree?
Yeah. Back in the day. You're too young for that. You don't know who Jermaine Dupri is.
Play a hating degree. I got to play a hating degree in nutrition. No, all jokes aside, a PhD is, by definition, I guess, the highest degree of education you can get in a particular field of study, right? So you get a PhD in nutrition and whatever, like all subjects for the most part have a PhD in. I guess the easiest way to describe what a PhD is or what you do when you go through a PhD is you're actually producing science versus consuming science, right?
Okay. That's a cool explanation. I've never heard it said that way.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. You're taught how to conduct the scientific method and produce science. That's literally what a PhD is, right? So if you're an undergrad or any sort of education that you're doing under a PhD or below a PhD, you are consuming science, right? In high school, you take a biology class, you are consuming biological sciences. If you're a biology degree in biology major in undergrad, all your classes, you are learning stuff that has already been produced, right? When you get to graduate level studies, if you're doing a master's, it's the same thing. And then when you do a PhD, you're on the other side of that equation. You are actually producing the science, right?
What was your final big paper? What did you research?
My actual PhD was on looking at the mechanisms by which dried plums, so prunes, can help with the prevention of bone loss in osteopenic men. So,
isn't it awesome? Because you have to come up with an original topic. You can't do anything that's been done before.
Dude, so I was
holy shit,
man. I'll explain to you how I ended up there. So, first and foremost, when you start a PhD, you work under a professor, right? And all professors, especially at big universities, they conduct research. That's their primary job. I used to think professors were teachers, right? They taught classes. And in fact, that's just a small part of their job. And most professors don't like teaching. They teach because they have to as part of their job. But the majority of the job is research. They're conducting research, right? And all professors have a slightly different niche in the area of research that they're in. You could be at a university in a nutrition department. There's 10 different professors. All 10 different professors have a slightly different niche, right? And the professor that I worked with worked in the area of functional foods. So he really looked at the disease preventative effects of different foods. That's the easiest way to put it. So when I joined that lab, I joined not knowing what research really was, not knowing that your area of research isn't really your area of research, it's your professor's area of research, right? And so when I started graduate school, I actually was originally a food science major, and I've always had somewhat of an entrepreneurial spirit, and I wanted to essentially use grad school to help uh, kickstart a business idea that I had, which was coming up with a food product and then marketing that food product and selling a food product.
Can you share the details of that or no?
Yeah, I was working on some like high protein snack thing. It was like a little protein ball thing that I was just doing in my dorm. I never actually got to like actually testing this in the lab.
Okay.
And the reason was because we had two food science professors, and none of them worked in like the food development space. So I didn't really have that opportunity. And one of the professors was like, "I'll guide you, but you're on your own if you do this, and it's probably going to take you really long." And I was like, "I'm good." The food science professor I was going to work with, he studied fish and nut allergens. So he would like figure out the chemical composition of the particular allergens, how they react, and then try to come up with some sort of way to modulate that essentially
Sounds
to
awful.
help people not be allergic, right? But essentially, sounds fancy. You walk into his lab, he had like hundreds of pounds of almonds. He was working on almonds. He had been working on almonds for over a decade. It just like didn't seem intriguing to me at all. So then I met this other professor.
Why? That sounds super exciting.
Dude, come on.
So you're just surrounded by balls and nuts at this point in
Yeah.
your career.
And it's just, I'm a social person. I like working with people, and that type of work, you're just sitting in a lab conducting experiments in a petri dish all day long for 12 hours a day. It just was not the lifestyle that I wanted.
Yeah.
And then I met this other professor, Dr. Arjmandi, who is the person who I worked with for my PhD. And he was in the area of functional foods, and it was all clinical research, so actually working with people. So I was way more interested in that. And when I joined his lab, the reason why I said I went through the ringer trying to figure out what my PhD was going to be is because, first and foremost, academia is very political, right? So as a professor,
No.
yeah, it's extremely political. So as a professor, you have a really easy time getting by if you kiss ass, seriously. Like, that's just how it is, at least my experience was. And you have a really hard time if you stand up to authority if you think certain things are wrong, right? And in my department, during the time that I was there, the leadership kind of sucked. At least from my perspective, it definitely sucked. And my professor was one who like really didn't like hypocrisy. He would call shit out, like, so he didn't have a good relationship with the people in the leadership team. And so they made his life a living hell. And I'll give you guys some examples. First project I was going to work on for my PhD was an animal study. We were doing using essentially a hamster model of atherosclerosis to see if black bean consumption, we were giving them like 5, 10, 15% of their diet coming from black beans, could reduce the progression of atherosclerosis in animals that are going to develop it anyways. That project got terminated for something really dumb that my professor did. And like, so here's the thing, like technically he definitely could get the project terminated for what he did, like legally, but it was something really small. Like if it was another professor, they probably wouldn't have terminated the project. So it was somewhat shitty there. And then the second project I started to work on, keep in mind, I dedicated over a year to each of these projects and they were terminated. We had no data and like it was done. The next project I was working on was a privately funded study by a company who was trying to develop a supplement, which was an extract of a vegetable called bitter melon. Have you guys heard of bitter melon? Yeah. It's used in like traditional like Eastern medicine for
polyphenols and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it does seem to have some benefits for blood sugar regulation. And so we were testing the effects of this supplement on pre-diabetics to see if it could help regulate blood sugar.
Humans?
Our inclusion, sorry? Yes, humans.
Humans?
Yeah. And, yep.
Cats.
So,
I think mainly cats. Pre-diabetic felines.
So our inclusion criteria was essentially pre-diabetics that were not on medication. So it was kind of hard to recruit because most pre-diabetics were already taking some sort of metformin essentially. And so we tried to widen our exclusion criteria to include individuals who have been on a stable dose of metformin for at least a year. And this was probably like 8 months to 10 months into the project. So we had already begun the project. All research studies have to be approved by the IRB, the Internal Review Board of the university. Essentially, it's a group of professors. They say like yay or nay to research essentially. And they had given us.
Do they wear cloaks? Do they wear cloaks like like high priestess in the
like the movie
Possibly
Skulls.
some of them. Possibly some.
Marriage.
If Jin was there, he definitely would be.
Oh, I'd wear a cloak.
Yeah. So
Big tall hat.
they had approved our study, and then like when we tried to expand the inclusion criteria, this was also during a time where like my professor was not having the best of relations with some of these people. And then they tried saying that they felt like our supplement, which again was just an extract, a solution of a vegetable. They said that our supplement was crossing over into like what's considered a drug category simply because we tried expanding our inclusion criteria to include individuals who were taking metformin. And they said that the only way that we could continue the research study was if we got approval from the FDA. Now, getting approval from the FDA would take us a long ass time, right? So we would have to pause the study. There are a dozen different steps to get approval. It would take a really long time, essentially. And so we said, okay, scratch that. We're just going to go to our previous proposal that was already approved. And they were like, no. Since you
Too late.
Since you submitted an amendment, we can't go back because we would have to reapprove it, and your supplement is no longer considered a supplement.
Yeah.
You need FDA approval regardless. And so the company that was funding the study said, screw this, we're just going to pull the funding and take the study to another university where we can just conduct our study. So that was year 2 of my PhD gone. And then,
Jesus,
along this whole time, my professor was conducting this large-scale USDA-funded study investigating the effects of dried plum consumption on bone health in osteopenic men. Osteopenia is just when you have a certain degree of bone loss, but you're not considered osteoporotic yet because you don't have sufficient bone loss. So it's like pre-diabetes and diabetes, right?
Yeah.
Osteopenia, osteoporosis. And we were doing this study because my professor, pretty much his whole career was built upon studying the effects of like estrogen on bone health. And so he had done some studies in postmenopausal women because women lose a ton of bone after menopause. We saw some benefits with dried plum consumption in terms of slowing down the rate of bone loss. So we were doing the same study in men. And essentially this was like my 3rd year of my PhD, and like my committee, because you have 3 to 4 professors who are your committee who essentially guide you along your PhD. They essentially determine whether you pass or don't pass certain milestones. They're the ones that are in charge of determining whether you move forward after your PhD or don't, right?
How long are you in school for at this point?
4 years. Oh, this was after 2 years of my PhD. All of this happened.
So okay, so you already did. So you did 4 years of undergrad.
4 years of undergrad,
and then
couple
this
years
year's
of grad school.
Technically, you do a master's. I did 1 year of a master's, and in my program, if you had like good academic standing, you could bypass into PhD.
Okay.
And that first year of master's counted towards PhD. So I did 4 years undergrad, 4 years PhD, 4.5 years PhD, really. And all of this stuff that happened that I'm mentioning happened like the first half. And so my committee, thankfully, I had some very kind people on my committee because you could also be screwed by the people on your committee if they're just assholes. And it happens very, very often because people have huge egos in academia. And they're just like, no, like this person, whatever. I don't know. It's crazy the things you see. But anyways, I was fortunate enough to have a very nice committee. They felt bad for my situation. And so instead of having me start a whole new research project from scratch, they allowed me to use the previous research study that my professor was working on, given that I had a unique angle or my own hypothesis. So everything that was proposed in the research study was just outcome-based to test bone mineral density and bone mineral content and a couple other bone-related variables. And we were looking at some blood biomarkers. And so I did some digging to see, to really try to find out like, hey, what mechanisms are involved here, right? Like why would prunes actually benefit bone? And there was some connection between particular compounds in prunes and the polarization state of macrophages. Macrophages are a particular type of immune cell. They can be in an anti or pro-inflammatory state. It seemed like some of these compounds in prunes can modulate the essentially like polarization state of these macrophages to be more anti-inflammatory. The anti-inflammatory macrophages secrete particular molecules like BMP2, which is a protein that stimulates bone growth. And all of this reading that I did essentially is what it is. A research review was conducted in like cell culture studies. So it really wasn't proven in humans. So I just proposed to look at some of these markers that are indicative of like the M2 or anti-inflammatory polarization state of macrophages. And I didn't find anything. So it didn't seem like the effects of the prunes were due to this mechanism that I proposed. But essentially I had to do a whole bunch of research review. I published a long research review on like the polarization states of macrophages and how components of dried plums would affect those. And then I published my PhD after saying that, like, hey, this isn't actually the way that it happens.
Sounds like a super interesting read.
You want? I'll send it to you.
That's because I have a master's that's in education, and then I was like, all right, I want to go and get one in nutrition. I was going to go the PhD route.
Okay.
And I'm like, fuck this. This is like too cellular. This is going to be so boring for me. I just can't do it. And I'm really glad that I didn't.
After hearing that story.
Yeah. So I just got the master's in it. I'm like, this is more applicable stuff. I mean, you're just learning how to read research. It's whatever. But that stuff sounds brutal.
I didn't even know what I was doing, man. Like it's funny because
like, why not?
My whole philosophy on life, like when people ask me like, you know, what's your long-term goal or how'd you get to where you are at the moment? Like, I've never had a game plan. I usually always look at the best opportunities in front of me at the moment and just take the one that I think is best and not think about it too much. Yeah. My whole thought process, like if I work hard and I pick the best choice, like I'm going to end up somewhere that's decently good, right?
Net positive.
It might not be the best, but it'll be somewhere.
Yeah. I've never been able to answer a 5-year goal question. Yeah.
No,
I have no idea what next year's even holds, you know, every day something different.
Hope to be alive for another week or so.
Yeah.
So Joey, with the PhD and with all the work that you've done to get to where you are, you're not sitting in a lab in a sterile environment, not working with individuals. And this is my biggest problem with academia right now. We have all these people that are starting to cite PubMed articles. They're researchers, they're PhDs, they're doctors, whatever the fuck, but they've never actually put their hands on a person. They've never spoken to a person. They have no idea what's happening in the real world in actual real life settings. But you actually do work with clients on a one-on-one basis.
Yes, I do.
And you do.
How do you work with them? What things do you work on them with? The training portion, the nutrition portion, both, one or the other?
So combined, nutrition, lifestyle, and training. And even though my PhD is in nutrition, I always jokingly say I have an honorary PhD in exercise science because I just always would. So to give you guys some perspective, like I started as an exercise science major in undergrad, failed out of exercise science, and then transitioned to nutrition. And the reason why I failed out was because there was a pass-fail class. So like you had to do nothing except attend once a week, a seminar at 8 a.m. And I was a freshman and I could not wake up at 8 a.m. because I was going to sleep at like 4 a.m. every day. Jesus. And if you missed the class more than like twice in the semester, you failed it technically. And I did that.
The fuck were you doing until 4 a.m.?
Studying.
I was a freshman.
He was studying for other things.
No, man. So I come like I've shared this on my podcast a million times. My background, like I grew up with a single mom, and she was extremely strict. I had no freedom in high school. Couldn't really do much of anything. Like after school, I did sports, and then I went home, and like that was my life. And so when I turned 18 and I went to college and I had complete freedom, I had no sense of responsibility. Like I didn't know how to do anything. Right? That's not true. It's not that I didn't know how to do anything, but like I didn't have a sense of responsibility and like consequence.
Yeah, nobody can. It's just like somebody who their parents like, I think you've had enough to eat. I think you've had enough to eat. And then as an adult, they struggle with weight management because they're like, no one's going to tell me I can't have any more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I got to school, I just like didn't really care much about school. That's not that I didn't care, but like if I didn't wake up for a class, I was like, it's all good.
Yeah, whatever.
You know,
I got another 3 years of this shit.
Yeah. That happened to me 2 semesters in a row. And I forgot why I was mentioning that. Oh, because I have a background in exercise science. I actually taught anatomy courses when I was in grad school. I did some personal training for a couple of years when I was in school as well. I started lifting when I was 15 because both of my parents were into fitness. I helped my friends get into shape. Like I consumed YouTube content. Like it's like there was no tomorrow. Do you guys remember Scooby? Like the OG guy on YouTube, like fitness guy?
Is that the same Scooby, like Scooby Prep?
Bald.
Yeah, he's still around. Jason Theobald.
Yeah. So he was probably the first person I started following on YouTube. Him and people like Chris Jones with Physiques of Greatness. Do you remember those channels?
Yep.
Yeah. So those were some of the first people. And like, I just love bodybuilding and I love the fitness stuff way before I cared about the nutrition stuff, because I just cared about being in shape. And then like more recently now I've been focusing more on overall health. And as you get older, you focus on those things more and you really see how beneficial focusing on those things is for the general population, right? So with my coaching, it's a combined service, nutrition, training, and lifestyle. And the reason why I group lifestyle in there is because I really coach clients from a habit-based perspective. So my whole approach is like, hey, we're going to have a training plan. It's going to be tailored to you. If you tell me you want to work out twice a week or 3 times a week, that's fine. The training is going to be emphasizing hypertrophy specifically, because most people that want to look a little bit better should probably focus on hypertrophy specifically, because low injury risk too if you're prioritizing range of motion, slow tempo. Like my philosophy from training really comes, it's really influenced by Mike Israetel, right? So like all the stuff he talks about
I was going to say, is he one of the first people you watched?
Yeah.
Like Israel?
Yeah. And then everything else with the nutrition and lifestyle is a habit-focused approach. So I'll do a detailed intake form with my clients, a ton of questions about nutrition, lifestyle. I go over that when I start working with them, and I identify a series of habits that would be beneficial for that person. Things like protein consumption, fiber, fruits and veggies, sleep hygiene, stress management, those types of things. And then I put together a 6-month game plan where we talk about the particular habits that we're going to develop and how we're going to implement them. So I like starting with no more than like maybe 2 or 3 habits with a particular client, making sure we're adherent with those before adding a new one. And so my nutritional approach, like I do ask my clients to track calories, because from a coaching perspective, it's very helpful. And if they're willing to do so, I encourage it. If they say no, it's all good. We just focus on the behavioral stuff first and foremost. And I always prioritize that more than anything anyways. Because for most clients who are relatively unhealthy, overweight, I think focusing on the behavioral stuff, the calories kind of take care of themselves to an extent, right? Like if you focus on increasing more lean protein consumption, if you focus on a daily fruit and vegetable goal, if you focus on having a regular meal schedule, these simple nutritional habits, most people will reduce their caloric intake fairly naturally. And then, you know, if they want to go beyond that, then we focus a little bit more on the caloric component of that. But that's my general approach when I work with people.
Do you think, as far as like, and great point you just brought up, as far as, okay, if somebody doesn't want to track calories, I believe, depending on where people are starting from, most people are not coming to me completely wet behind the ears and have not done any type of attempt at fat loss before. Most people are coming to me, they've either gone through a coach before, they've been consuming content like ours for months and months, if not years. They understand what macro counting is. They get it all. Do you see a variance in results from the folks that are willing to track calories versus the folks that are not willing to track calories?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because most of my clients are willing to do so, right? I always say, like, if they're not willing, like, that's okay. But I'd say 95% of my clients are typically willing to do so.
Same.
Exactly. And I think the clients that are all in will do so. I'll say there are periods of times with certain clients where we maybe take a break from tracking.
Of course.
Because they might feel like it's overwhelming or whatnot. Sometimes I won't have a client track every day, but maybe we just track weekends if weekends are typically what they struggle with. Here's what I typically say, man. Like, I think when we talk about tracking, we inherently refer to tracking calories. But the truth is that you can track a lot of things. It doesn't just have to be calories, right? And for some people, tracking their calories for some reason can be really overwhelming. So if you have a habit-based approach and you are focusing on your habits, you're technically tracking your habits, right? I ask all my clients to track their steps. I ask all my clients to track their workouts. I ask all my clients to track their body weight regularly. So I have had circumstances, again, minimal, because most clients are willing to track calories, but I've had several clients who are just like, hey man, I really don't want to track calories. And honestly, a lot of these clients, and some clients I have actually recommended not doing so because they come to me not knowing jack shit, right? And so sometimes I'm like, hey, we'll track calories a month from now, but let's focus on these behaviors first, because they walk 1,000 steps per day. They get shit sleep, have no idea what their protein intake is, have no idea what their fiber intake is, somewhat overweight, they don't work out. With a person like that, I almost prefer them not to track their calories and to track these behaviors like, hey, I want you to eat this many servings of protein. This is what a serving of protein looks like. This many servings of fruits and veggies. This is what a serving of fruits and veggies looks like. Let's track your weight. Let's try to aim for at least 5,000 or 6,000 steps. We're slowly going to increase those. And I've had a lot of success with clients who don't initially start tracking calories and just implement the behaviors because they've never focused on any of this at all, right?
Yeah.
And so somebody who doesn't even know, like who doesn't have a healthy diet at all and who doesn't do much physical activity at all is really going to benefit in terms of weight loss and improvements in body composition just by focusing on these little variables.
It's the best kind of client. It's the best kind of client. You're gonna see so much change so quickly versus the person who's been trying to lose that last 10 pounds, who's been through 17 coaches and who thinks that their hormones are the problem.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to touch on next. It's like, it depends on the person, right? Because there's the opposite of that, where there are people who like have been into fitness for quite some time and they're obsessed with losing the last 10 pounds. And it's like, they're already, let's be honest, a lot of those people, like, they're already in decent shape. They may not be jacked and single digit body fat, but a lot of them aren't like super overweight and unhealthy, right? They're in decent shape and they want to take their physique to the next level, which is fine. Like in that case, you have to track because if you already focus on your protein intake, you already focus on your fiber, you're already physically active, you already work out. Like the next step is to track your calories. Why? Because the leaner you are, the exponentially more difficult it becomes to become like even leaner, right? And at a certain degree, like you are going to be hungry. It is going to be uncomfortable. And if you don't track, you don't have that feedback. It's hard to know when you've eaten enough, when, again, you're already in shape, you already have a pretty healthy diet. To be honest, man, like, because I like to use myself as an example for all this stuff too. I do think it's possible to get pretty damn lean without tracking because I do it every year. Like I don't track anything. I haven't tracked anything in years. But the caveat of that is that I've been focusing on nutrition for over a decade now, and I have
right. Yeah. Consider the source.
Right? So this is what I tell my clients. It's like, hey, I don't track my calories, but when I'm cutting, I eat the same exact shit every day, pretty much. You know, I have a couple of different meals. It doesn't affect me negatively because I enjoy this type of lifestyle, but I understand everybody doesn't. I track my steps. I get 10,000 every day, no compromise. I get my workouts in. I prioritize my sleep. So like, I'm not tracking calories, but I'm tracking all this other stuff. Which
and I'm sure your focus. Yeah, I'm sure your focus becomes much more on quality of food, eliminating or drastically reducing processed foods. I would assume that that's part of that if you're trying to really lean up. Yeah.
And my general approach, and again, this might not be the best for everybody. It's like when I'm cutting, I intentionally make sure I'm a little bit hungry by the end of the day. Because if I'm not hungry at all, I know I probably ate a little bit too much for that particular day. So there's a lot of unknowns that I account for by just being very boring with my approach. It's not for everybody. The person that likes more variety, then tracking is better.
But it just works. We understand that the boring, basic, foundational stuff that we all have practiced for 10, 15, 20 years is why we look the way we look and why we don't have to track our calories unless we're trying to be very finite about the outcome. So I want to switch gears and talk about the stuff that you talk about where you're essentially demystifying or getting the fear-mongering out of the conversation. We see a lot of it today, whether it's artificial sweeteners, whether it's seed oils, whether it's gluten, whether it's dairy. Right off the bat, if you can just very quickly explain what the difference between an allergy and an intolerance is, and how would we classify those two things so people can better understand that?
Sure. So there are certain degrees to which an allergy can occur too, right? Like I think the main difference is really the degree of sensitivity. You can have a sensitivity to a particular food, which means that when you consume the food, you don't feel good. Right? Essentially, you could have a number of different symptoms, but you have an adverse reaction where you don't feel that great. An allergy is an immune response to a particular protein, specifically in a food, right? And allergies can be deadly. You could also have mild allergies, and you can have symptoms associated with those allergies. Some of the symptoms of the allergies can be similar to some of the sensitivities in foods. Yep. But oftentimes sensitivities in foods really come down, I'll preface this. I'm not super well versed in this area. So when it comes to food sensitivities, the particular reason why they're caused, I'm unsure, right? I know people can have sensitivities to gluten. You can also have a gluten allergy. They're different. You can have sensitivities to FODMAP containing foods. And some of the symptoms there include things like bloating, indigestion, right? Gassiness. Now, I know that allergies are particularly caused by an immune response. Your essentially immune system is attacking a protein in a food, but I don't really know the mechanism behind a sensitivity the same way that I do an allergy.
I would assume just some kind of a lack in enzyme production.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not producing enough lactase or something like that, then you're going to have
Sure.
a certain
An
level of
intolerance,
intolerance.
like a lactose intolerance, right? You don't produce lactase, you can take a lactate.
Now, in your experience, and this is going to hinge on results.
Yeah.
There are a lot of folks maybe not in the industry, but there are coaches who then kind of corroborate this message that if you have a sensitivity to food or you have an intolerance to food, that is what's standing in the way of fat loss. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, if you're eating a ton of food that you have sensitivities to or intolerances to, you'd probably actually lose weight because you're not really like digesting and absorbing a lot of those nutrients, right? It's actually probably going through your intestinal tract.
But it's the inflammation that's causing the fat loss resistance due to systemic underlying issues.
That's pretty good.
Central nervous system.
You sound like you sound like every fucking doctor that comes on Oprah's show.
Yeah, dude, I've actually never watched Oprah once in my life.
Don't.
But
if you want to debunk, you could spend the rest of your life just debunking everything she says. But.
If you're my age, you had to have watched Oprah.
Yeah.
Man, I
dude,
grew
I
up
only debunk
every
stuff
day
because like people will send them to me and be like, "This video," I'm like, "All right," but it's funny because I actually don't stay up to date with a lot of media stuff at all.
Don't. Again, you have a great head of hair. Keep it.
It's mostly people send me stuff and I debunk it. But when it comes to the sensitivity stuff, it's funny because for example, if you have a sensitivity to milk and every time you consume some sort of dairy, I'll use the word dairy instead of milk, you consume dairy, you have really bad bloating and gassiness and diarrhea. Like,
and you shit in your bed while you're sleeping
properly, right? You're not absorbing the full nutritional value of that food. So you're actually excreting more calories than you would compared to if you were to properly digest it, right? So the whole idea that sensitivities are preventing fat loss is not true. I think one of the reasons why this is often perpetuated too is because if somebody does consume a good amount of foods that they are sensitive to, and they feel, like they have these symptoms associated with those foods, and they're experiencing these symptoms frequently, like bloating, gassiness, water retention. And now you eliminate all these foods. Yeah, you're going to feel a lot better. You're not going to be as bloated, so you immediately think you're leaner. You look better in the mirror because your stomach's not distended, right? Like, I think I probably have a minor intolerance to gluten myself because if I eat it like a ton of pizza or a ton of bread, like super uncomfortably bloated. And then the next morning you look way better, right? Like, so that's probably the main reason why people like perpetuate this, and clients, if they do this in the short term, they eliminate the foods that they're having sensitivities to, they're going to feel a lot better. And they're like, oh, this works. But
the problem with the gluten thing is everybody has a certain level of tolerance or intolerance to it. And they are pumping gluten in food now that did not exist 30 years ago.
True.
It was all of a sudden early 2000s. Celebrities went on a gluten-free diet. And back then it was essentially you cut out carbs. And it was a gluten-free diet. And now, since that they're pumping more and more gluten in because it acts like a yeast, they're getting more product out of their yield. So now you have more gluten in a bread product that wasn't there in the 90s or 80s. So now somebody has bread and they're like, oh, I have a gluten intolerance. Like, well, you're exposing yourself to much more gluten than people forever ago. You never heard about this stuff before. And then now you have so many gluten-free foods that people are still just eating gluten-free foods and they can't lose weight because they're eating all these cookies, snacks, chips, everything that are gluten-free.
Well, I was unaware about increasing gluten content in bread, honestly, because gluten is just a protein, right? So if that were, From what I understood, learning years ago, that it is something that they can pump in, and there's just more gluten in these bread products. I mean, it could be wrong, I could be misremembering, but that's always been the reason why I say this.
something.
The reason why I say this is because if that were true, the protein content of bread would be substantially higher.
Agreed.
Right? Because when you look at a slice of bread and it says 3 grams of protein, that's gluten. That's 3 grams of gluten, pretty much, right?
Yeah, there's nothing else in there that would cause that protein increase.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why the increase in sensitivities are so much more prevalent. I think part of it might be just
Soy boys?
people are more aware of it too. I don't really know, man.
I think there's a psychosomatic effect. I think there's also a food quality systemic effect that we have no idea how to measure, because now with the increase of industrial farming, with the increase of industrial meat farming and everything else, like the control we used to have and the quality control we used to have is no longer applicable anymore. It's just not something that we can measure. So I think to argue about this type of stuff, or you could raise awareness to it for sure and be like, just use some common sense. Understand that the food companies are not out to make us healthy. They're making money. They don't give a fuck about whether you're distended or losing weight or creating type 2 diabetes. That's not their concern. So I think the simplest way to put a subject like that to bed is to say, be as smart as you can with your choices. Don't obsess about the idea of organic versus not organic or GMO versus non-GMO, because you're going to drive yourself fucking crazy. And as long as you're making single whole ingredient food choices more often than not, and keeping so I don't even like to use the words processed foods anymore, because everything is fucking processed.
You just have to triage your problems. I mean, people who are struggling with their weight and then they're worrying about organic. Why don't you worry about food quality and walking
or
before you're worrying about organic?
Tackle quantity first. If you're fat, tackle quantity. Don't talk to me about the quality of the food. We'll get to quality eventually. Let's tackle. Now, if you're a woman who's 15% body fat and you're looking to get to 12, maybe organic matters. Maybe non-GMO matters. Maybe grass-fed beef versus non matters. Who knows? It's like Chris Bumstead. Chris Bumstead needs to focus on his rec fem and his angle of his feet while he squats. Us three don't give a fuck.
So I wanted to add to this really quick, because my buddy Adrian, who we were talking about earlier, has made several posts on this before. Like, people talk about conventional versus organic produce, right? And they're like, there's 2 arguments here. One, that organic produce doesn't have pesticides, which isn't true.
Yeah, there's overspray.
Of course. And what's in the ground already.
Yeah. And the second aspect of this is that people are like, oh, organic is more nutritionally dense. And
not if the soil's the same garbage, correct?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But in theory, like, most organic products have a slightly higher nutritional value of vitamins and minerals.
Immeasurable.
I emphasize the word slightly. And my buddy Adrian, and like he just words it nicely. He's made posts on this. It's like, the issue is most people just aren't eating enough fucking produce. So instead of focusing on like, this one has 5% more vitamin A, just like eat more of it, right? Like, most people don't even eat like 2 or 3 servings of fruits and veggies per day. I try to have a serving or 2 at least with every meal. So that's what I try to tell people, right? Like, just focus on eating more produce. And this is it's a hot topic, man, because I talk about these things on social media often, like, not hyperfixating on organic versus conventional versus free range, grass-fed versus conventionally raised beef. And because most people like don't have a healthy diet to start with, right? Like you were mentioning. And so it's like majoring in the minors. It's like, do these things matter? Perhaps. I'm not going to say yes or no, because if we objectively look at the research data, if conventionally raised produce was so bad because of glyphosate, we would see that people that eat more die more. And we don't see that. We see the opposite. So if there are negative impacts, the positive outcomes of consuming more produce significantly outweigh the negative.
Oh,
well, if you're going to be so if you're going to be so worried about it, why did you not start your own garden in your yard?
Yeah,
I mean, why don't you have your own regenerative soil garden in your yard, and you're going
with your cow and your chickens in the back? Like, it's just it's a waste of breath for most people. And I think the problem is that when we give advice, when we see advice given, and I don't think it's bad advice. Like, I'm not a big Huberman fan. I don't really love these charlatans that are out there, but their overall message isn't bad. Seed oils are bad for you. Maybe yes, maybe no, but let's not eat the shit that's got seed oils in it in abundance, and maybe that'll probably improve our nutritional quality. Gluten is not good for you. Well, if you ate more naturally sourced carbs like rice and potatoes and ate less bread, you'd probably consume fewer calories, leading to better health outcomes. Dairy is bad for you. I don't know. Like I don't have a stance on dairy. It makes me feel like shit, but I don't eat a lot of it. And when I do, I take some enzymes and hope for the best. But I think in general, these pieces of advice are attached to sensational claims. And that's the problem that I have, is the claim that's being sensationalized. But the advice underlying the claim isn't bad. It's just there's no fucking context about it ever.
Yeah.
It's always just, don't do this because I said so. Buy my pill instead because I'm the liver king and I'm selling liver cock pills. And that's where the problem is.
It's
Liver
if it's
cock.
if it's
What the hell is that, bro?
it's a real thing. It's a real
Liver
thing.
cock.
If it's Flav City approved, I'm getting it. That's what it boils down
Bobby
to for
approved
me.
now, man. Get it right.
Bobby approved.
No, so check it out.
That shows how much I follow him.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I'll add a little nuance here because
Please do.
I think the message of some of these people, like the message itself, is okay. For example,
Right.
Eddie, eat whole foods, don't eat processed foods.
Sure.
No
Great.
shit, right? No shit.
Yeah.
And the issue sometimes I do have an issue with the explanation that then goes beyond that, right? So I made a video on Eddie comparing eggs to a protein bar. This has 12 grams of protein. This has 20 grams of protein. The bar has 20, right? True. And then he goes, but this is shit because it has too many ingredients, so it's not bioavailable. It's like, nah, dude, that's a complete lie. Like, actually, that protein bar, the main ingredient is whey protein, and whey protein is the most digestible protein. So I make a video explaining that. And this is where people, like, again, I don't know if people are trying to troll just for the sake of trolling, because I don't think people are actually this dumb. I think people just say dumb shit, right? But people, dude, I can't tell you the most common comment that I got was, how can you say that a protein bar is healthier than eggs? Give me the bars.
Like,
the
I
bar,
didn't
please.
say that.
Don't eat a protein bar. I'm like,
You didn't say it was
that's not what
healthier.
I'm saying. This guy is saying that the protein in this protein bar is not bioavailable because there's too many ingredients.
It is shit.
That's not true. I will tell you, like, yeah, eat eggs. A whole food is 99% of the time going to be better. And like, eggs are super nutrient dense. Eat eggs. And you can also eat a protein bar. It's not one or the other, right? The message is fine. Eat more whole foods. But then he just makes shit up, man.
There's no reference to dose.
Yeah, there's
with
no
these
reference to
people.
those. But not even
That's
that.
the problem.
Not even that. It's like the number of ingredients means nothing. Right.
Right,
The number of
no.
ingredients means nothing. Legally, the way the ingredients list is set is like, if you add something to a food, you have to list it as an ingredient. Right. So
Right.
fortified bread will have 1 million ingredients because it's been
Yeah, and
fortified
it's
with
like
105
vitamin B12, but it says the
Exactly.
technical term.
Exactly. And so if you grab a banana, it's a banana. But if you list the ingredients, it's the same exact stuff that's in a lot of these products. And actually, a banana has hundreds of, like, even thousands of
But
ingredients.
what's water?
Chemicals.
What would
Chemicals.
water would be dihydrogen oxide?
Yeah,
Yes.
2 hydrogens in a night. Yeah.
Dihydrogen oxide? Yeah. Oh, don't drink that. That's a
Exactly. So that
Right,
shit
there's
is-
2 chemicals in water.
Yeah. Now the nuance that I was going to add around is like, there's, I think, a very big difference between people that say that message, like Eddie is all about whole foods, not processed foods. That's actually a good message. And the rationale behind it is not good, which is also an issue because it creates fear around foods that's completely unnecessary. And the thing is, it just adds confusion to the general public, and the general public's already confused, right? So you're just adding confusion. Or like, if Eddie said this is too many ingredients, then how many ingredients is okay?
Right.
Two ingredients.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
And where does that number come from? It's arbitrary.
And that's only if I put one single ingredient foods together on one plate. That's the only time you have more than one ingredient.
Now,
Eddie
place
out.
I have an issue with around is like when people say stuff like, when people create fear around particular foods,
Right.
like dairy is bad. Like you mentioned, the outcome might be good if you consume less dairy. Yeah, maybe if you cut out dairy, could you eat less calories? Sure, but like there is nothing bad about dairy, like nothing.
Unless it makes you feel like shit.
That, yeah, if you have a sensitivity to it, right?
Right.
But aside from that, like dairy consumption is actually associated with positive health outcomes.
Yep.
So I have
Top
just as
sources
much
of
an
protein
issue
for
when people-
kids.
Yeah, I
Like-
have just as much of an issue when people say dairy is bad as when they say veggies are bad because of defense chemicals. It's the same shit, right? It's the
That's
same
true.
shit.
That's true.
And, like,
Veggies are not good for you.
Who was that? Was it Gunderson that kept pushing
Yeah,
that
you
bullshit?
just brought this up. My aunt-
Saladino.
Saladino is one of them. Gundry's another one. He's all
Gundry, that's what it is.
So
Gundry.
my aunt was just, and this is such a perfect example of people like leaning towards individuals who confirm their biases, right? So my aunt was just here in Tampa this weekend, And my aunt is very intelligent. She owns a nursing business. She owns a pharmacy. She has taken numerous courses on biological sciences. Like, she's very smart. And she's here in town this weekend, and she knows what I do professionally. And so she pulls out her phone and she goes, "Hey, what do you think about this guy, Dr. Gundry?" And I just laugh, and I'm like, I literally call him out like once a month. And she was like, "Really? I just bought his supplements." And I was like,
With the reds and the greens?
I don't know what supplement she bought because I didn't ask, and I didn't want to make her feel bad. So I was like,
It's probably the liver cock supplement.
Yeah,
Liver cock, yeah.
liver cock.
Yeah.
So I was like, like, I'm not gonna tell you wasted your money. Like, at the end of the day, it probably doesn't hurt. It might not have too much of a benefit, but like, whatever. You bought his supplements, and she asked me. She was like, "Well, like, what do you not like about him?" And keep in mind, my aunt does not like vegetables at all. Like,
Doesn't like vegetables.
No. She
Got it.
definitely has some sort of like sensory type issue with particular types of textures.
Okay.
So no sort of like crunchy, leafy vegetables. She does not eat any of them at all. And she goes, why do you say his information is not good? And I just said, I was like, he is a doctor that says that eating vegetables are bad for you. I'll just leave it at that. And she starts laughing, and she's like, that's why I liked him. And I was like, man, people really just want to confirm what they...
Yeah, they just want to hear what they want to hear.
But then he's selling powdered vegetables.
Yeah, then he sells powdered vegetables. That's what. So
what we do is we extract the defense chemicals from our.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly
sourced vegetables.
I had a client back in Connecticut when I was training people in person, and she was complaining of her cortisol issues and her gut health issues and her hormone issues. Meanwhile, she trained suboptimally 3 times a week. She drank every single fucking night, and then she bought Gundry's supplement packets, and you can only buy it in a collective set that's worth. I think it's more than $200.
I'm sure.
And it's like a 30-day supply of this one scoop of each powder, and you have to put it into water.
You want
to? And I'm sitting.
That shit is so fucking processed, and all these people are like, "Don't eat processed foods," right? And it's like people don't put 2 and 2 together, man. It's like these people are saying, "Don't eat processed food," and then they sell a greens powder that has the defense chemicals extracted. You know how much processing something has to go to extract a particular compound?
If you sign up for the monthly subscription, you can get half price off our reverse osmosis system, because that's the only way that you can actually extract the true benefits from our greens powder is reverse osmosis water. It's like,
but that's what it is. But that's what it is.
The same crap.
The easiest way to spot somebody who's full of shit is to see if they have a good message, and then it's immediately followed by a sale of something that they're selling. Not a program of theirs, not an actual code. Because I think if you're, even this is going to sound bad, but let's say, for example, you are saying that like seed oils are bad. And if you work with me, we're going to cut out seed oils, but then I'm actually going to coach you throughout this process of fat loss. Coaching to me means you're going to apply context. I'm actually not upset about that. If you personally have a bias against seed oils, great. As long as you're able to give somebody some nuance, some context, and then walk them through the process through the entire way, I don't think you've done a bad job. The problem I have is when you say something is bad, you create this negative illusion of it, and then you also have a supplement to sell them on the back end to be able to kind of counterbalance your claim. And now I have the solution to a problem that I've invented for you.
Yeah. I'll give you my perspective on that. I have no issue with people perhaps selling a coaching program or whatever it is based off what works for them. The issue I have is when people try to explain certain biases with a scientific explanation that is not scientific, right? The Munoz, for example. Like, and I've said this so many times, and I've had other coaches on my podcast who I interview, and I ask them about like their coaching methods because I'm just interested in seeing how they do something, right? And do you guys know Dad Bod Steve Lusk?
I've heard of him, yeah.
So he just works with dads who are not in shape. Yeah. And his whole thing is intermittent fasting. And he's like, first thing I do is teach him about intermittent fasting. And he's like, I know it doesn't have any unique benefits, but it helps. And I'm like, I have no issue with that. Mark Bell and the Power Project. I really like those guys. Why do I like those guys? Because they don't try to attach science to their approach. They know that their approach isn't the most scientific. Like, hey man, I eat mostly meat. I'm mostly carnivore. Sometimes I eat some veggies, sometimes I eat some fruits. And if people ask them, why do you do that? Their answer every single time consistently is because it works for me. Find what
Yeah.
works for you. And hey,
You
if you want me
can't
to
get
teach
mad
you
at
about
that.
what works for me, yeah, if you want me to teach you about works for me, about what worked for me, like I'll help you out. Yeah, no issue, man. And listen, we're not looking for perfection here either. Like, is the carnivore diet a perfect diet, an optimal diet for health? Hell no, it's not. But can it help improve somebody's health if they have a typical Western American diet? Yeah, right. And what we're
Absolutely.
looking for here is improvement. The issue that I have is people like Sean Baker, for example, or Carnivore MD, where they're like, no. You should actually only eat meat because if you're eating other stuff, you are damaging your health because of these defense chemicals. And look at all the science that actually is not quality science. And so that's my big problem. It's like, dude, just say this is my bias and I eat this
Yeah.
way, right? Like
Right.
you don't have to attach some sort of scientific explanation because it's just not substantiated at all.
Well, we can't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I understand the scientific method and what science is, it's the art of disproving a hypothesis and trying to find ways, every way possible, to know that that's not true, to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So just by nature and verbiage, science means that things are not black and white and that they are interpretable.
Questioning science is science.
Right. So, and I'll give you a little bit of context, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I don't want to waste your time. But there was a speaker that spoke at my event on menopause.
Sure.
She's a 30-year integrative dietitian. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds like she got a degree in dietetics.
Okay.
She's been working with people for longer than most of us have been alive for that are in the coaching space. And I think that anytime you work with a person, there's always going to be a risk that you're going to fuck them up somehow, whether it's psychologically or physiologically. Yeah. Our goal is to do no harm. But at the end of the day, we're all learning our way also too. And we have no idea. Maybe what works for one person doesn't work for another. And if we deployed that protocol, it may have not worked and it fucked them up, whatever. I think generally speaking, most coaches and most clinicians out there are trying to do the right thing at the broadest spectrum possible, but there's always going to be collateral damage here and there. So she had presented some science, not science. I don't want to say science because she didn't say that this is rooted in science. She said, this is the way that I work with my menopausal women. I don't want them to be plant-based because I find that meat-based is better. I want them to fast, and I want them to go lower carb, higher protein, higher fat, because that's her preference and that's what she's seen work.
Sure.
So one of the people that were at the event were taking screenshots of her presentation and then going through and debunking what she was saying by finding PubMed articles to corroborate his stance.
Yeah.
Now, this became a big issue. I got very upset about it. There was controversy on social media. It was starting to question the quality of the event, whatever, and the quality of the presenter. I sent an email out to every single attendee that came, and I basically said, hey, guys, whatever's presented on stage, whatever you read on social media, use some of this critical thinking that you've been given.
Yeah.
And understand that not every single thing that you hear or read or see is going to apply to each and every individual that you work with. You also have to understand that there's some level of experimentation. What we thought was bro science 30 years ago when I picked up dumbbells for the first time is now being shown by Menno Henselblad to be true. So we may not be on the forefront of understanding. So if people can say whatever they want to say today that says this is safe or this is not safe, maybe aspartame is good today, but it'll be bad 20 years from now. But we have to be open and available for that. So my question to you, Joey, is when it comes to having a bias in science, is there a way to have a bias in science but still make it productive and helpful?
Yeah. Do you mind providing a little bit more context to that question with maybe an example of what you mean?
So, for example, let's say for the individual that was in question who was saying that she prefers her clients to be meat-based.
Sure.
Not meaning like you can omnivorous diet, right? She doesn't want to work with vegans because she finds that vegans have a tougher time getting protein, which is going to cause all sorts of downstream effects. So her preference is if you're going to be a vegan, I'm not going to work with you.
I think what your question is, how do we use science? Because the people that are the quote unquote charlatans or the quote unquote people who just want to debunk stuff are using science. Yeah. They're using PubMed.
Yeah. To corroborate their points.
Yeah. So how can we use science, because science can show anything. You're going to see scientific research showing both sides of everything, because everybody finds a PubMed article. How do we use it the right way? Would that be kind of what you're asking?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how can we use science effectively to guide our coaching practice?
Like, why do we
or
listen
whatever?
to you and your science when you're going against somebody versus their science?
Right.
It's a great question, right? Because people do say that all the time. It's funny because people often say, like, he's just sharing your opinion, his opinion, and you're sharing yours. It's like, no, I'm not sharing my opinion, dude. Like, this has nothing to do with my opinion. That's usually what I say, because it's not my opinion, right? It's what the science shows. But anyways, to answer the question directly, in that circumstance, like, there's a difference too between science and your business model, right? I have considered many times working only with men. Why? Because I feel like I can relate better to them. It's not because science says I should only work with men, right? So if this person prefers to only work with a particular type of client who follows a particular dietary pattern because it's what her business model is built upon, there's nothing wrong with that. Just like my buddy Dad Bod Steve, right? He's going to work with clients who are going to follow his intermittent fasting protocol. Why? Because that's his coaching model. That's his business model, right? So like, and again, I think this is like what's beautiful about capitalism and whether or not you're a good business person and you're good at marketing. Like, if you have a shit product that doesn't deliver results, it's not going to be successful, right? So you can put whatever the hell you want out there. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you're not going to make money off it. So that's an important thing to consider.
One
say
follow-up.
Scammers.
No. What bothered me about what transpired with what happened at my event was there was the statement multiple times made that misinformation is dangerous.
Gotcha.
I have a problem with that statement because it's like saying guns kill people. Like, somebody has to pick the gun up, have an intention, pull the trigger. That's when the gun becomes dangerous. A gun that's unloaded sitting in a truck doesn't do anything. Just like information that's given to a person with critical thinking isn't dangerous.
Sure.
So talk about that for a second.
Based off what you mentioned, I don't think that situation is an example of misinformation. Like, if I said it's twisting the message, right? Because if I stood here and I said, I follow a carnivore diet because I prefer to follow a carnivore diet, and I work with clients that like to follow a carnivore style diet.
And you list all the benefits that come from it.
No. Let's see.
I'm saying, even if you did, like, you could list all the benefits and still your experience, their experience. Kind of like what the presenter did. She's listing the benefits of this potential protocol.
Yes, but what I want to say is, like, because you mentioned, Aram, like, she wasn't necessarily trying to prove that her method is optimal using science, right?
Nope.
So for example, like, the issue is that the person that did the stuff of taking the screenshots and debunking is taking the stuff out of context, right?
Correct.
They're saying, hey, this person is saying that this is optimal. And, like, that's not necessarily what she said. She said, this is the type of client that I work with and this is my method, right? That's not misinformation. Actually, she's saying, this is what I do. That's not misinformation. Misinformation would be Gundry saying that oxalates are really bad for you and XYZ. That's misinformation, right? I wouldn't say, I think saying that misinformation about nutrition is dangerous. I understand why some people say it, and I'll say this. Because I think it's tough to talk about these things because context really matters, right?
But since COVID, misinformation became a catchphrase since COVID.
Yes.
And it's just the new phrase that people like to use to sound smart and superior. It's just, I've never even thought to use the word misinformation in any context about anything. It's just,
I like the word misconception. That's a real word.
Well,
that's something that we have a problem with.
That you don't understand the thing well. Misinformation means that you're intentionally lying about something.
Well, there's a nefarious character to that statement, right? Like, I'm saying this to you because I want to damage something about it.
Yeah.
Well,
that's bullshit to me.
With nutrition space, like, we can all say that, like, hey, if you follow a carnivore diet, the thing is, like,
you're too scientific.
We're emphasizing the wrong thing. I do have an issue when people blatantly lie or try to make up science. I'm not going to say it's dangerous, but I think it's fucked up.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
Like, Gundry's stuff, I wouldn't say is dangerous, but it's misinformation. It's not right? It's not right. Like, I think the concept of, like, guns kill versus, no, it's not the gun, it's the person. Like, there's a difference there between, like, because that's not necessarily misinformation. Misinformation is, like, when you're attaching a particular rationale or something and the description that you're given is just incorrect, right? And so we can say that it's not dangerous with like the Gundry example, because if you don't eat oatmeal, you're not going to die, right? That's not
Exactly.
But let's take this to an extreme. Let's say there's a Gundry type character that tells you that you shouldn't eat for 30 days. That's very extreme, right? And most people would say that's fucking ridiculous.
Aram could probably use a good 30 days off of food.
Let's say somebody's gullible. Seriously, let's say somebody's gullible and does fall for that.
Yeah.
And they die. Was that dangerous information? Was the information dangerous? Like, I think there can be an argument that it is, especially if the person is trying to like have some sort of scientific rationale. That's not true at all, right? And I shared a very extreme example, but the reason why I share extreme examples is because extreme examples paint the picture. When we're just like in the middle, it's like, hey, eating just meat is not going to kill you. Like, that's not dangerous. Yeah, I understand that. I get that, because you're still eating food and stuff. But like, can some of the and there have been people that have followed some of these crazy recommendations and have had really bad outcomes, right? Like they have. And I mean,
but who's responsible? Let me ask you this, Joey. Whose responsibility is that, in your opinion?
Fuck, that's such a hard question, man. I think we're all responsible for our actions, first and foremost. But I think our actions are heavily influenced by what we're exposed to.
Yeah,
I think both parties are responsible in that situation.
There's some blame on both sides, because the other person isn't completely faultless either, right? Like if somebody knows nothing about nutrition at all, and has never consumed any content online, and they're unhealthy, and they're like, shit, I should probably focus on my nutrition, and like they go on YouTube and they're shown a bad video, and just they clicked on that video, and now they're showing a couple more bad videos, and like they were just taking the wrong direction.
Yeah, the algorithm just steered them in the wrong way.
Information created some harm, right? And some, depending on what the information was. So I'll say, like, I think information can be harmful. I don't think it's as black and white as saying like just this person's fault or that person's fault. Yes, we all have autonomy. We all decide to do things or decide not to do things. But in many ways, the things we decide to do are to a certain degree influenced by the stuff that we're exposed to, right? And so with people like, again, to bring this back to the misinformation online about nutrition, like Eddie and this guy and that guy, because people often ask me like, why do you care if they're inherently doing good for some people? Because they are, right? Like some people are having some benefit.
Sure.
And it's because they could do better, right? Like they could harm less people, because some people are being harmed. Like you mentioned, our goal is to not do any harm. Inevitably, some people will have some degree of harm, right? Like, have I worked with some clients who have negatively been impacted psychologically by focusing on body composition and calorie counting? Yes. Did I force that upon them? No, it was their choice.
That'll be a clip.
I don't feel bad about it because it was their choice and they learned afterwards. And when I saw that it was negatively impacting them psychologically, I was like, hey, maybe we should stop here. I'll refund you, but I don't think this is working, right? But you did create some harm. Now, some people create way more harm than others. And the people that are creating more harm, perhaps because they have some sort of shitty information and they like double down on it. The reason why I care about that is because they could do better. They could harm less people and they could benefit more people, right? Like that's.
I think that can be an easy red flag for people as you're saying that, because I'm always, and I know Aram is as well. It's like I want people to have the perspective of let's try, let's see how this is versus this is the solution. I think too many people try something and that with the preconceived notion that this is the solution because that's the way that information is delivered by a lot of people. Yeah. And if you can just go into it like Aram, he's doing a 24-hour fast once a week. You just started. Today was your first one. And I'm like, oh, why are you doing it? He's like, I just want to see how it goes. Like that's how people should go about this kind of stuff. And all of us maybe delivering the information that we deliver. It's, hey, this is a way that you can try. And I think the red flag. Yeah, I think a red flag for people that are listening, even though I think most people that listen to us probably have a decent idea. They're not total newbies. That can be the red flag is if the person that you are following is telling you this is the way, the truth and the light, the way, the truth and the light, then that is your red flag when it comes to, is this guy legit or not?
Yeah, I think people just need to be more comfortable with saying like, I don't know. Right. Like at the beginning, when you guys asked me the difference between an allergy and a sensitivity, I was like, I don't really know the mechanism why people have sensitivities. I just know they do. It's like, hey, just say, I don't know. Right. Like, and I don't have issues with people like making a business out of like a particular protocol because
Yeah.
we're free to do whatever we want, right? The issue is like, hey, if you promote a seed oil free type of method for whatever reason, if the
Because
client
it's awful and
asks
it's
you-
going to kill you.
yeah, if the
Good,
client
good,
asks
good
you
luck.
why
Good luck,
seed
by
oils-
the way.
Because
if
seed
the
oils
client asks you why
murder
use seed oils,
humans.
don't say because seed oils cause inflammation. Just say because this works for me, right? Like, because I want to bring this back to the question that you asked of like, how can people use science? I don't recommend most people to go on PubMed and read articles.
I don't either. It's a nightmare.
No, what the fuck it says? Like,
Well, because
when
yeah,
you
I mean
go to-
that's the one thing. Like I said, like anytime somebody's asking, like, what's the difference between your certifications and a master's degree? I'm like, I learned how to read research. Like that's kind of it. Research can show both sides of everything, and you start to learn how to read. Like, who was it funded by?
But-
What was the actual result? Was it statistically significant or not? Because half
what
these
I'm
articles have a
thinking
title
here-
that somebody will read, and then the result was not significantly,
Yeah.
not statistically significant.
when we say that research shows both sides, I think that's the issue when people don't know how to properly interpret research.
Yeah.
Because research actually doesn't show both sides for the most part. When you understand
Because if it's the same type of actual
population,
trial.
context, right?
Yes.
So, for example, we can talk about the concept of seed oils and inflammation. And this is why I say people should not read PubMed. If people want to be guided by science, you should follow people that you truly trust. And that's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
Like I could sit here and say, hey, trust me. And I think I speak the way that an expert would speak. But to somebody who is not an expert and doesn't know anything, it's really hard to pick up on that, right? It's like, hey, that guy's saying, I don't know. He's not an expert. He doesn't know shit. That guy's saying you can eat processed foods. That guy's a joke, right? That's the issue on social media. Like people think the stuff that I'm saying is a joke because I provide nuance. I say, I don't know. Like I provide context. I say that processed foods in certain circumstances aren't bad. And so when you have somebody
You're
like
being paid by big food.
exactly, but when you have all these other charlatans who like have millions of followers and they speak very confidently, that person seems like the expert, right? So first thing, if you want to be guided by science, you need to find the right people to follow and don't try to go read science because it's not going to make sense. Like unless you take a course on how to read science. And I'm going to provide some examples with what was it saying, seed oils, right? People are like, yeah, it shows both sides. The research shows both sides. So what's the truth? It's like, no, it actually doesn't at all. The claim that people like hang on to is that seed oils are rich in omega-6s. Omega-6s can be turned
Pro-inflammatory.
into pro-inflammatory molecules. Yeah, that happens in a petri dish, right?
In a petri dish.
Now, it's true because the chemical composition of omega-6 can be altered to turn into arachidonic acid. It goes down these different pathways and can increase pro-inflammatory molecules. That's not, first off, it's like when you eat seed oils and measure inflammatory markers in humans, we do not see an uptick in inflammatory markers at all. Okay, so
Acutely or for the long term?
chronically when calories are
Okay.
controlled. When caloric consumption
When calories are controlled for.
Exactly.
So we're in an even energy balance.
I was going to touch on this nuance. It shows that there are confounding variables. If you eat a ton of seed oils and you have high inflammatory markers, it might be because you're over consuming food. And that
Yep.
would happen independent of the fat source, independent of the caloric source.
It's the same thing with the intermittent
food-
fasting and autophagy. You get the same effect just from being in a calorie deficit.
Yeah. All food causes some inflammation acutely.
Has to.
It's part of the digestive process.
Has to.
But that doesn't mean that you have chronic increases in inflammation. And
Right.
when you substitute things like, and again, I'm not anti-saturated fat at all. I think there's a lot of nuance here as well. But overall, when we see people who have high LDL cholesterol, when you substitute saturated fat for seed oils, there's an improvement in blood lipids, right? So like the outcome data doesn't show the same thing that the mechanistic data does. Why?
Can you explain the difference between those two terms?
Yeah,
You're just saying the
Outcome
petri
data
dish is the mechanistic.
Yeah, so mechanism simply means that you are trying to see what could happen in a cell culture study, right? So you can isolate some cells from some tissue. It can be liver tissue. It can be endothelial cells from your cardiovascular. It could be any type of cell from any sort of tissue, right? And you can keep these cells alive in a petri dish by providing the appropriate nutrients that the cells
Like
need
dried
to provide.
prunes. Like dried
Exactly.
prunes.
Yeah. But you cultivate these cells in a petri dish, and then you apply a particular type of compound or whatever it may be, right? You can put omega-6s in the petri dish alongside with the cells that you cultivated. And then you measure something, right? You measure inflammatory molecules, or you can measure the polarization state of macrophages, or you can measure the phosphorylation of a particular enzyme. You can measure very, very specific things that tells you what's going on mechanistically. Mechanistically meaning that this compound activates this enzyme and
On a
this
cellular
enzyme.
level.
Exactly. What's happening on a cellular level. That doesn't always happen when you take into account a whole physiological system like a human being, right? Because
like
many things happen, many things interact. For example, I'm trying to think of a ridiculous example here.
I mean, there's always the study with the aspartame in rats, and everybody's like, "No, that stuff causes cancer." I'm like, "Well, that studies show that, but it's like that was in rats, one, and they gave them a dosage that no human's going to consume." And then you look at the other studies where it's actually in humans. There's no evidence to show that it causes cancer. So that's what I mean when it shows both sides. But what you're saying is clarifying. There's certain science that's not necessarily done in humans. It's going to show this. The science that is done in humans shows this. Those are the things you have to pay attention to.
The type of tissue matters, like whether the compound makes it to that tissue matters, right? If we're talking about toxicity levels, people say like, this is toxic for your liver. Cell culture studies show this. And it's like, well, does that thing make it to your liver in that concentration when you eat it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
For example, hydrochloric acid. If hydrochloric acid came in contact with your skin, it would burn your skin.
Yep.
It would burn anything that it would come in contact with. It would dissolve your bones.
Not in your
you have a ton
stomach.
of hydrochloric acid in your stomach, right? So it's things are compartmentalized too. So when we talk about the omega-6 thing, like when you feed omega-6s to people so outcome data means that you give somebody something and you measure the outcome. You're not measuring the mechanism. Yep. You're looking at the outcome. What's the outcome? Inflammation. We measure inflammation. Do we see an increase in inflammation? No. Why? Because a whole bunch of shit can happen. First and foremost, omega-6s are a fatty acid. We can use fatty acids for a number of things, not just this one pro-inflammatory mechanism, right? So one, omega-6s can be used for energy production. So maybe more omega-6s are just used for energy production, especially if the person's not in a caloric surplus. Maybe if the person's not in a caloric surplus, a lot of the omega-6 doesn't even go down this particular pathway. It just gets used for energy, right? That's one possibility. Another possibility is homeostasis, right? Just like
nothing happens.
Hey, when you eat more cholesterol, your blood cholesterol doesn't necessarily increase a ton. Why? Because your body produces less. Maybe there's something like that going on.
People hate when I say that.
So like if you're eating omega-6.
Like, I know I'm not a doctor, but.
So let's say you eat omega-6 and it does go down this inflammatory pathway and there is an uptick in the production of particular inflammatory molecules. And maybe that's regulated by your immune system and your immune system is producing less of these inflammatory molecules. So it stays relatively stable, right? Like there are so many things going on. There are so many what we call redundant systems in physiology where like if one thing isn't working, another thing takes over. And it's just never as simple as X causes Y causes Z.
Right.
It's not that simple. And that's the issue with all of these ridiculous claims. Dairy causes this, omega-6s do that. It's like, hey, that just like doesn't happen. The context matters.
And nothing is happening in isolation and nothing is happening in a vacuum. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people have a problem with because consumers of this information are trying to find the boogie monster and find the one variable that they're missing. And then the producers of this information are trying to create problems that don't exist to sell shit. So we have a very big disconnect in the users of information and the producers of information. And we have to be able to, our job as coaches, in my opinion, is to close that gap.
Yeah. And I wanted to touch on this because I want to express too how I use science in my particular coaching perspective, right? Because like, can some things be up for debates? Sure. Some things will change in 20 years, right? Some things that we think are right may be wrong and vice versa. But there are some things that I would be absolutely mind blown if they changed.
Like what?
Things like fruits and veggies being bad for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, hey, We just know that's not bad, right? Fiber consumption being beneficial for satiety regulation, for lowering blood lipids and improving cholesterol. Like, dude, there is just data on millions of individuals at this point. Like, I don't think that can ever be debated. The things that are debated are things that, like, we don't really have very concrete data on, right? Like aspartame, we don't have super concrete data on higher doses. And that's why I'm even careful when I talk about things like that. I usually say things like, based off the data that we have, it seems like it's not harmful. Based off the data that we do have, you would need to consume this much to cause an adverse effect. And hey, that doesn't mean that I'm saying it's better than water, right?
Yeah. It doesn't mean I'm saying to have it all the time and make every cake with it and put it in every single
but I will say, like,
tea and coffee.
Because here's the thing. It's like, in the absence of data, because people in the absence of data want to make really strong claims the other way. Right? It's like, oh, we don't really know. So like, it's like, hey, we also can't say that, right? Like, even with that, Jim, like, if you asked me, is it okay to eat, to have a diet soda with every meal every day, 3 or 4 a day? Dude, I would have a really hard time saying yes or no to that question, right? Like, am I going to say no? That's not okay.
I would say, for me, it's like, all right, you're 300 pounds and you've been drinking 6 regular Cokes. Yeah, it's okay to go to 3 or 4 Diet Cokes. That's what I would, for that person. Yeah. Again, context.
My bias makes me really want to say, like, hey, yeah, you probably shouldn't drink 4 Diet Cokes. But I think I'm self-aware enough to understand that that's my personal bias. Yeah. Because if we are going to base recommendations based off some evidence, the truth is that the evidence doesn't suggest that that's bad, right? Yeah. So I would tell a client, like, hey, based off the evidence that we have, we can't really say that drinking 4 Diet Cokes is going to cause any harm.
But let's pay attention.
I personally wouldn't do that, and maybe I would just drink more water. But it's give and take too, because if you're drinking tap water, people are going to say there's heavy metals in tap water, and that's
fluoride. Fluoride's going to.
That's why I got well water. Water.
You can make the same argument for everything. That's why I like to have a strong foundation based off the evidence that we do have. Yeah. Given that I understand that we don't have very strong evidence for everything. Yeah. But if somebody asks, the thing I will not do is if somebody asks me, is drinking 4 diet sodas bad every day? I'm not going to say, yeah, it's horrible. Because I just don't know. And the truth is, like, nobody knows. So everybody who says, yeah, it's
it depends.
Horrible.
And it goes back to what we said, like, try it out, see how you feel. But if you're concerned, pay attention to how you feel afterwards. See if you are starting to notice, notice that. And then if you are, then hey, let's let's try 1. Okay, you don't have a problem? Cool. Let's try 2 to see where, but it's paying attention and learning how to pay attention to your body. And then the problem too is all these people out here, it's like you're basing everything on the outliers, and that's the issue too, because obviously you do a study on something and study can conclusively say this is the way things are going, but it didn't happen for 100% of the people in the trial.
Dude, the thing that bothers me the most is, like, my grandma drank Diet Coke and she had cancer.
She also smoked cigarettes for 30 years.
It wasn't the cigarette.
All the time when I talk about diet soda, man, it's like,
do
you know how many fucking people drink diet soda? Yeah, no shit. Some of them are gonna have cancer. Like, you can't make a connection there, right?
It's like
the correlation causation thing is
right.
Also,
my old man, when he was 22 years old, quit smoking because he threw up for the first time from drinking too much, and he attributed it to cigarettes and not the fact that he drank 2.5 bottles of vodka and fell out a window. So he quit smoking that day. Mechanistically, what happened? He drank too much fucking alcohol. Causatively, what happened? He fucking fell out a window because he was hammered, and he had a cigarette that he doesn't normally have, and he blamed the fall on the cigarette. So we can find so much.
It worked out. At least he stopped one of the things.
Hey, listen. He's much healthier now for drinking. His body is adapted to the amount of alcohol he drinks now.
It'd be dangerous for him to stop at this point.
He would die. He would die. I already know for a fact he will die tomorrow if he stops drinking.
Doesn't he start convulsing after 3 hours without?
He has to have he's got the same way we eat every 4 hours or so. He's drinking every 4 hours because that keeps him alive. It's like Bane's mask.
It's crazy to see, man. My cousin passed away from liver cirrhosis from alcoholism. He was in his 40s.
Jesus.
And dude, I remember. So my family's from Cuba. My cousin lived in Cuba, and part of it was definitely because the medical care was shitty as well. But anyways, I had gone to Cuba because his mom, my aunt, had cancer. This was back in like 2012, and so I was hanging out with him. He was a good 20 years older than me, and we run some errands, just him and I. And then on the way back to the hotel, he's like, he stops at a bar and he's like, don't tell your mom. I'm like, all right,
Jesus.
I don't care. Like, do whatever you want. And I thought he was just like, he was going to have a drink. And he goes in and dude, this is probably like an 8-ounce, 12-ounce glass. He had one that was a little bit thinner than this, twice the height. So maybe like 16 ounces.
A little highball. He had a little highball. If it
And
was
he
thin.
tells the guy, just fill it up with straight rum. Okay? 16 ounces of rum. No, hold up, guys. I'm not done. He grabs it, chugs it like it's a glass of water, puts it down, says another one.
One more.
Puts it back up, chugs it like it's water, puts it down, and we walk out. Keep in mind, it's the middle of summer in Cuba. It's extremely hot. You can smell the alcohol. And as we're walking out is when he's like, hey, like, don't mention this to your mom and your aunt. I'm like, dude, I don't need to mention anything. You fucking reek. Like, you know, the alcohol from a mile away. Like, we're going to go hang out with them at the pool. Like, what are you talking about? You know? But it was crazy to see, man, because, like, my dad had issues with alcohol, but I never really saw it. That was my first time really seeing, like, the tolerance people build, right? Because, like, dude, I don't drink frequently. I might have a drink.
I would throw up
like
immediately.
But if I have like a shot of whiskey, like, man, it just like burns. Like, you really feel it, right? And this man like grabbed 16 ounces of rum and just drank it like it was water. It was crazy. And I'm not exaggerating when I said he drank it like it was water.
Devil's in the dose.
He had not had a sip of water in like a week. He's been in a desert, dehydrated, and like he just had a glass of water. Seriously, man, it was crazy.
Holy shit! What a great way to end a podcast, dude.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, Jimmy says this more often than I do, but I think this is one of the best conversations we've had. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I really do think there's a massive disconnect between academia and practicality.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you're one of the people out there that's bridging this gap. It's such a valuable thing that you're doing for our industry, and keep your text messages open. You're getting an invite soon.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And, you know, I'm going to touch on this really quick before we head out of here because just like we always say, like, hey, like medical doctors don't know much about nutrition. A patient should be really working with their medical doctor and perhaps a dietitian to bridge that gap. I don't think it's a scientist's role to bridge that gap either, right? I just think there's not enough people like really bridging that gap well. That's the thing. I try to do it because I enjoy doing it. Like, I really like making videos. I was just telling a friend of mine earlier, they were like, I'm really appreciative for the work that you do. I'm like, thank you, but this is fun to me. Like, I really like producing content. It's fun, right? And so I do it because I enjoy it. But I think this area in between is such a like unregulated area, and it's not really like a traditional career, right? Like, what do? You bridge the gap between academics and then people who are like it's not really like, how do you even explain that job, right? Like, what's it called? I don't know, but we definitely need more people doing it because it is really important. You know, you see all the businesses and even businesses that traditionally have been really successful in the weight loss space, like the Atkins diet or the South Beach diet or whatever, you name them. I'll say this, as we were talking about earlier, because I'm not going to say it's all bad or all good. Have they helped some people? Sure. Could they probably have helped more people with better information? Sure, because all their information isn't as accurate as it could be, right? And I think if there were more people perhaps doing the stuff that we do somewhere in the middle, like actually taking science and translating it so people understand, then maybe, you know, like I would love to see, and not because it's my business, but like a coaching business like mine or yours, Aram, that's like legitimate and probably doing very little harm, being like a top sort of like weight loss and health program in the US recognized by everybody, right? Like, why is it Atkins? Because it's not that great, right?
We don't have the market.
That's better. It's marketing.
We don't have the marketing team or the dollars behind it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I would love, that's what the Real Coaches Summit was all about, man. Like I'm trying to create an army of coaches that are so fucking smart and so practical and helpful that at some point it will drown out the influencer noise. I don't think it ever will, to be quite honest.
It's even like it's the presentation. I mean, it was like when we had Mike Israetel on and we're talking about ketosis. And I go, the way I always explain it, you know, if you're in a calorie deficit and you're not doing keto, your body breaks down body fat for energy through lipolysis.
Yeah.
When you're not eating carbs, your body breaks down body fat for energy by creating ketones for energy. So we could just call it the lipolysis diet. We're doing the lipolysis diet, and you make it sound like it's this big sexy thing, and all it is a calorie deficit, but it's like everything's presented like this is the hack, this is the trick. And if we can just I think drill home the hack and the trick
Well,
is to have an overall healthy lifestyle and to use common sense when we're figuring these things out.
yeah, I think there's a couple components here. Like, for example, Atkins, yes, a lot of dollars behind marketing, but it's only profitable because people fall for it.
It worked,
Right?
and it worked.
So yeah, it works. But what I'm saying, like, if the general public was more informed, maybe that wouldn't be their choice, right? Maybe their choice would be to hire somebody from your business or my business or whoever. There's a number of people doing good work, right? But it's the marketing is convincing the people, and the people are being convinced because maybe they don't have the best information. Atkins is probably not the best example, but there are definitely some top fat loss type of businesses that are complete shit, right? And people fall for it because the information's there, because there's not enough people in the middle, like
Optavia
science, to make it more. Yeah, exactly. And with what you were saying, Jim, like with the hacks and this and that, it comes down to marketing and language, right? Because I don't think there's anything wrong with, like, I try to present my stuff a little bit better in that format. Like, for example, I'm launching a membership service this Friday. Just opened up the wait list for it. And part of it is that we work on healthy habits on a weekly basis. That's boring, right? So I marketed it as our unique healthy habits program, right? You get access to our healthy habits program. I'm not going to say you're going to get nutrition education and guidance. No, you get enrolled in our healthy habits program. It's terminology, right? So I have no issue with the terminology. It's like, if people were just actually more informed, they wouldn't fall for the terminology if they can see the bullshit behind the terminology, perhaps.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Anyways, guys, I talk a lot. I know. I'm sorry.
No, this is great. I was actually going to say, I hope you're signing up for a 5-hour podcast, because that's what this is going to be. But I'm happy that we covered the ground we did. I think this is going to be massively illuminating to a lot of people that are confused.
Sweet,
I wanted to ask. We could even afterwards. I was gonna ask about where the line is with the posting the people, because that seems to be the trend now. We could talk about it off air. I don't know if it's something that's worth
the Stitch videos, whatever.
For this, yeah.
What,
but where's that line of, like, people are doing that, and sometimes it's like, that was ridiculous. You could have just talked about the topic you wanted to talk about without showing that influencer on the treadmill.
I have a different perspective on this.
Yeah,
I do it every day.
Yeah. So that's why I'm asking you, because I think that you do it in a well way. You also have a voice that you could say, like, the most awful, racist, terrible thing, and it would sound sweet.
Dude,
he's very soothing. He's a very soothing character.
I was talking to a friend of mine earlier that I've never once listened to one of my podcasts because I hate the way my voice sounds.
Yeah, I mean, you could say something awful to someone, and they'd be like, "Thank you," like that. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
So it's a gift.
I sound like a fucking Gestapo SS officer when I speak.
Yeah. Like he could be complimenting someone, and they're like, oh, "Geez, that was triggering."
Jesus, God.
Yeah. Well, to talk about, like, the reposting stuff, I have a little bit of a different perspective, because I think if you're putting yourself out on social media, you're putting yourself out on social media, right? Like, no, but I guess technically nobody owns a video. Like, you can just show a video. It's not that big of a deal. I wouldn't be offended if somebody showed a video of myself. And I think, at the end of the day, we're all just sharing ideas, and the context matters too, because I used to do no reaction content, and I do it now a lot for a couple of reasons. Like, one, when I first did it, I asked my audience, I was like, do you like this? And they said yes. And I asked why. And they were like, because you're actually providing context why some people are saying things that are incorrect. Whereas when you just share information, it's very helpful, but it doesn't contextualize it in, again, the context of this person saying this is actually why it's incorrect. This is why it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Two, we're all running businesses online, right? And people eat that shit up. Like, the reaction style content, people just watch it more. Dude, so I posted a video about Eddie Abu talking about KFC for kids, saying that it stunts growth and it prevents learning. His claims, his words, not mine. If I made a video and I was like, KFC does not prevent growth, or it does not blunt growth, and it does not stop learning. Kids can eat KFC. Like,
nobody's
looking
at that.
Right? The context matters sometimes. I guess in some situations, like, you can educate on particular topics without reacting. But man, people just watch the reaction stuff. And so if I can do a reaction style video, and I feel good about it, because I'm not trying to just be an asshole and talk shit about people. But there are a couple of people that I think are putting out bad information or particular videos. And in some instances, in most instances, actually, I don't really attack or am disrespectful towards a person.
No,
No, you
your
never
stuff
do.
always sounds nice. Everything that
You
you're
never
saying
do.
is definitely delivered very well.
But I try to do that because, like, hey man, I'm running a business. I'm trying to find ways that are more effective to spread my message. And if doing this, man, it's not even like a 5 or 10% difference. It's sometimes like a 2 or 3 times difference in terms of the viewership if I simply react to something, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense from a business standpoint too, because it's like, I'm trying to spread my message. I stand by my message. I know I'm not trying to be scummy and sell some bullshit. So I think I'm doing this in an ethical way, and if this helps me reach more people, I'm all for it. It's the same way, dude. Like, people like reached out to me when I was on Max Lugavere's podcast and when I went on Jillian Michaels' podcast, and they were like, "How can you talk to those people?" I'm like, "Yo, this has nothing to do with their message. This has all to do with the fact that they have millions of followers, and they're letting me talk to their millions of followers. I'm gonna,
which is awesome.
You know?
It's great exposure.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the thing is, I would not give 2 fucks if somebody reacts to my video.
Yeah.
And if they do and say something dumb, like, they're just exposing themselves, right? It's not like it's consequence free either. Because if you react to somebody and you sound dumb, like, you sound dumb, right? And I've made some videos where I have afterwards been like, damn, like, I kind of sounded dumb there, and like, I felt bad about it, and I've tried to restructure the way I do things too. So there's a lot of nuance there too.
I have a question, and then I don't wrap it up. Just a morbid curiosity, since you brought up, like, hey, these things get views and all that kind of stuff. If you got tired of doing that, even if it was still getting views, have you thought about, like, would you be like, I don't want to fucking do these anymore, even if they're getting killer views? Or if you really like doing it, but the views on those types of videos dropped, would you keep doing it because it's something you enjoy? I know you're not at that crossroads now, but have you ever thought about that? Like, I don't even want to do these anymore or anything. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
I've been feeling that a little bit lately in terms of, like, it gets repetitive. There's a couple of aspects of it. Part of it, I do this is for enjoyment, but I also do this for my business, right? So I'm going to do what works, even if it's not super enjoyable, the same way I'm going to go to the gym, even if I don't feel like going to the gym, right?
Yep.
So there's an aspect of that too. Now, I have been thinking about strategic ways to diversify the type of content that I do, but it's typically going to go in a direction that is a mix of something that I enjoy and something that is effective.
Yeah.
Because although I enjoy content, making content, I much rather spend time with my wife and my son. That's way more enjoyable. So I'm not going to spend time doing something that's not effective, right? So even in terms of, like, what type of content am I going to diversify towards? I've seen people do a lot of content where it's just a lot of B-roll with voiceover. So if I'm going to share, like, 5 best exercises instead of talking about it, like, just share a video of the 5 exercises with a voiceover.
Then it's just you playing with your kid. You playing with your kid in the background with that.
Yeah, you like that, don't you?
Dude, 3 seconds, you'll get 2,000 views per person. They'll be like, oh, look at him with this kid. Oh, I'm going to keep watching it.
Yeah. But if it's not effective, man, if it's less effective, I probably won't move in that direction, because I don't enjoy doing it so much that I'm just like, out of the kindness of my heart, I'm going to do this. Like, the podcast, I kind of do. Like, my podcast doesn't grow like my social media does, and I do it because I get to connect with people, and it's fun to have.
And it's a great show. Yours is one of the only ones I listen to.
Oh, sweet, dude. Thank you, man.
I don't listen to anything, and I barely scroll. I feel I'm so out of it. It's fantastic.
He doesn't even listen to our own podcast. He hates our podcast.
I don't listen to my own podcast. I honestly just listen to like business related stuff, because I feel like that's the area I lack in the most.
Just listen to the first 7 minutes of us with Mike Israetel. That's all you need.
Yeah, dude. That was
and then the last 20 minutes.
Man on the planet, and he owns 3 Lamborghinis, and
we just talked about his microphone looking like a penis, and then AI sex robots at the end.
Oh man.
Yeah, that conversation went off the rails quick, but
anyway.
No, thank you again, man. This is fantastic. I will be in touch with you about next year. People need more Joey Munoz.
Absolutely. And our final question that we ask all of our guests. Thank you again. Last question. Bye.